Ever stop to really think about what a gallon of clean water is actually worth?
Hmm.
Or, the economic contribution of a single tree breathing in carbon dioxide?
It's something we take for granted, isn't it?
Totally. We just assume these vital resources will always be there, and, well, our usual economic calculations often completely overlook their fundamental importance.
That's the fascinating puzzle we're getting into today. We're doing a deep dive into this really thought-provoking online discussion.
Well,
Yeah, it started from an article that actually tried quite bravely to put a value on these essential ecosystem services, things like clean air, stable forests, the
right,
basics.
the stuff we need to live.
Exactly. So our goal is to sort of unpack the complexities of assigning cost, price, and ultimately a true sense of value to these natural resources. The whole conversation, kicked off by Edward Morbius, really challenges how we see the planet's worth beyond just, money.
Okay, and to navigate this, because it sounds potentially huge, we're going to zero in on three core ideas that came up early on: cost, price, and value.
That's the plan. It became clear pretty quickly in the discussion that while we might use these words interchangeably sometimes,
Yeah, you probably do.
we all do,
Huh.
but they carry very different weight and meaning when you're talking about the natural world.
Okay.
So yeah, let's start by getting those definitions straight, just as the discussion laid them out. First up is cost.
Cost, right.
So cost is defined as what is given up, what you sacrifice to produce something. Think about growing wheat.
Oh,
The cost involves the land, the water, the farmer's time and effort, fuel for the tractor, maybe even some soil runoff, all of that.
right, the inputs.
Exactly, the inputs. And a key point here is that wheat is renewable. The effort and resources needed this year are, broadly speaking, what it'll take next year, too. The cost is tied to replacement.
Okay, so for things that regenerate, cost equals replacement cost, more or less.
Yeah.
But what about stuff that doesn't come back? Like, oil or natural gas?
Ah, yes. And this is where the distinction gets really, really important. For non-renewables, fossil fuels being the classic example, the cost is basically the cost of extraction.
To getting it out of the ground.
Pretty much. The tech, the labor, the rigs, the pipelines. It's not about the cost of replacement because how could you? Their formation took millions, hundreds of millions of years of geology.
Wow.
Yeah, the discussion highlights this idea. They're like ancient sunlight stored over these vast timescales. The amount we burn in a single year is, well, it's an almost unimaginable amount of accumulated energy.
So it's like we're just drawing down this giant, irreplaceable savings account.
Right.
Like thinkers like Herman Daly, William Ophuls, Aldo Leopold have talked about this, right?
Yeah.
Spending our natural capital.
Precisely. It's a one-way street, fundamentally. Which brings us nicely to the second concept, price.
Okay, price. This feels more familiar. Market price.
Generally, yes. The exchange value. What something sells for. In a busy market, lots of buyers, lots of sellers, the price kind of settles based on supply and demand. Pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
But the discussion points out, what about thin markets? Where there are very few transactions, maybe only one buyer and one seller.
Like a space station. Or a super rare painting.
Exactly, like the International Space Station or a Rembrandt. In those cases, the price isn't set by a big market. It's basically down to negotiation between those specific parties. It gets much more subjective.
Okay, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Price is about the deal, the transaction. So how does value fit in then? How's it different?
Right, so value is defined as the use value to the person who has it, what it's actually worth to you.
Ah, okay. The personal worth.
Yes, and this is where you often see this big gap. Typically, the cost to make something is less than the price it sells for.
Or businesses wouldn't make it.
Exactly. And the price is often less, sometimes much less, than how much the buyer actually values having or using it. So generally, cost, price, value.
Cost is lowest, price in the middle, personal value usually highest. Okay. Now, how did this framework get applied to that BBC Earth article, the one trying to put a dollar figure on nature?
Well, the BBC piece, it was ambitious. It tried to quantify the worth of several key ecosystem services. They used some pretty broad stroke calculations.
Like what?
Okay, so for freshwater, they basically equated its value to the entire global GDP.
The whole thing. Wow.
Yeah, the logic being without water, no economy, right? Plankton was valued based on its carbon absorption role. Bees, well, their value was tied to the crops they pollinate.
Mm-hmm.
Wetlands got value for hurricane protection, and even things like manta rays or national parks were valued based on tourism dollars.
That's a real mix of approaches, casting a wide net, like you said.
Yeah.
But the online discussion, the one we're drawing from, It wasn't entirely convinced, was it?
Not entirely, no. This central critique was really about applying this single monetary yardstick to things that are fundamentally different.
Different in terms of cost, price, value.
Exactly. Ecosystem services, as the discussion points out, often have incredibly low, sometimes zero, access cost. Think about breathing air.
Right, costs nothing.
Costs nothing. So the market price is often negligible or non-existent. But the use value, to us, to the planet, it's astronomical. These are the foundations of everything, yet the market price captures almost none of that utility.
So we're getting these absolutely vital services for, like, pocket change in economic terms.
Yeah.
That sounds dangerous. Like we just take them for granted and misuse them.
That's the risk, absolutely. And the discussion then pivots to look at other ways to think about value, ways that might give us better insights.
Okay, alternatives.
Yeah. One idea mentioned briefly was subtraction value, but the author seemed more focused on marginal value.
Marginal value. Okay, what's the thinking there?
So marginal value looks at the impact of a small change in the resource. The example given was oxygen levels.
Right.
Think about Denver, the mile-high city. The air's thinner, less oxygen than at sea level. It's noticeable.
Yeah, you feel it if you're not used to it.
Yeah, definitely. Then go even higher, up in the Rockies. The effects get much stronger. We can see the impact on people, on animals, and we can even figure out the costs of trying to mitigate it, like carrying oxygen tanks.
Ah, okay, so apply that same logic elsewhere. Like, what's the impact of losing, say, 1% of our fresh water?
Yeah,
Or a tiny bit of soil fertility?
precisely. It's about understanding the consequences at the edge, the margin, rather than trying to nail down some huge total number for all the water or all the soil.
That feels more graspable somehow.
It can be. Another approach that came up was looking at the cost of the next best substitution or replacement mechanism.
Okay, like if we mess this up, what's plan B and what does it cost?
Exactly. So if we degrade our topsoil, what are the real costs and difficulties of switching to regenerative farming to rebuild it? Or for fresh water, we can look at desalination.
Turning salt water fresh.
Right. And the discussion noted that desalination tech has actually gotten way better and cheaper over the last few decades. That's a relevant data point when you think about the cost of replacing natural freshwater sources.
So these alternative methods try to give a more practical sense of what we lose or what we'd have to spend to compensate. But the discussion also suggested that even those original BBC numbers, as broad as they were probably still underestimates, right? Especially for really complex things.
That's right, particularly for things like whole forests or fisheries or coral reefs. The author argues that if you genuinely try to account for the total loss of coral reefs, the impact on biodiversity, coastal protection, fishing, everything.
It's almost unimaginable.
It really is. The cascade effects are huge. So the suggestion was that the BBC's numbers, while attention-grabbing, were likely very conservative, just scratching the surface.
Which leads into that powerful quote from Aldo Leopold from a Sand County Almanac. That really struck me.
Oh, it's fantastic, isn't it? He wrote, "The outstanding scientific discovery of the 20th century is not television or radio, but rather the complexity of the land organism. Only those who know the most about it can appreciate how little is known about it. The last word in ignorance is the man who says of an animal or plant, 'What good is it?'
Wow. Yeah.
If the land mechanism as a whole is good, then every part is good, whether we understand it or not." It just perfectly captures that deep interconnectedness, doesn't it? And the value of every piece, even the ones we don't fully grasp.
It's incredibly humbling. A real check on trying to reduce everything to a simple number.
Yeah.
The online discussion also touched on a few other related points too, didn't it? Some nuances.
It did, yeah. There was a quick but important exchange about costs. Should we focus just on extraction costs or also factor in the downstream costs? Pollution, environmental damage.
Right.
Lithium mining came up as an example. Getting the lithium out might have one cost, but if it uses vast amounts of water in a desert,
Right.
well, that's a huge, often externalized cost.
Okay, it's something about inflection points.
Yeah, someone pointed out that determining those marginal values we talked about can be tricky because ecosystems aren't always linear. You might lose a little bit, then a little bit more, and suddenly hit an inflection point or tipping point where things get much worse very quickly.
Ah, so the value of that last little bit before the collapse is enormous, but hard to predict.
Exactly. And then a couple of other big ideas were floated. Emergy.
Emergy, what's that about?
It's a concept from Eugene and Howard Odum. It's another way to think about cost, but instead of money, It tries to measure the embedded energy, mostly solar energy, required to produce something.
So, like, how much sun energy went into making this tree or this fish or this barrel of oil over time?
Kind of, yeah. It's about tracking the total environmental support measured in energy units. It gives a really different perspective on the fundamental cost from nature's side.
That is fascinating.
Yeah,
Thinking about value in terms of its energy foundation. And there was one last point about a potential clash between money and ecology.
right. Boris Borchers brought this up. He suggested there might be this intrinsic conflict between the way we use abstract monetary prices for trading simple numbers and the way ecosystem science understands the world.
Which is complex and interconnected.
Totally. Concepts like biodiversity capture that complexity, but they're incredibly hard to just slap a price tag on. The worry is that by forcing everything into a monetary box, we lose sight of the intrinsic worth, the relationships, the things that don't fit neatly on a spreadsheet.
So, wrapping this all up,
Mm-hmm.
after diving into cost, price, value, the BBC attempts the alternative, Leopold, what's the core message that stands out for you?
I think fundamentally it's the sheer difficulty, maybe impossibility of assigning one single consistent value to Earth's vital services. We've seen how cost, price, and value are different beasts,
Yeah.
especially for ecosystem services where the use value is enormous, but the market price is tiny or zero. Our methods for quantifying this stuff seem inherently limited.
And they probably undervalue nature.
Massively, most likely. And that undervaluation isn't just an academic problem, right? It actively encourages us to damage these systems because their true worth doesn't show up in our economic decisions.
Okay, so let's leave our listener with this. Thinking about that Aldo Leopold quote again, the complexity, how little we know, how every part matters. If we really take that on board, if we accept how interconnected and complex our planet is, how should that change how we design our economies? How we make our own choices? What does good really mean in that context? Definitely something to mull over.